You know why the cookie cried?
Why did the cookie cry?
Because his father was away for so long.
Oh! Apparently I'm the blonde one of the group.
Well, hello there, Graveliers. Welcome to another episode of On Gravel. This is Andrew McKean, podcasting today from the 7th floor of the AC Hotel in beautiful downtown Salt Lake City. I'm here for Mule Deer Foundation board meeting. You know, the conspiracy theorists among us will observe that Ryan Bronson's also on the Mule Deer Foundation board of directors, but he's not going to make the trip. Why not, Ryan?
I am not. Well, I am now. I'm sitting in Studio 1A in beautiful Eagan, Minnesota, in my new study, in my new home, and I've got deer and wildlife running around outside. But the reason that I'm not going to be at the Mule Deer Foundation board meeting, and I didn't want to tell the people on the board this, is because I'm going elk hunting, and I'm leaving tomorrow to go to another state, New Mexico, to hunt elk. And one thing that I've noticed with folks in the mule deer advocate community, and I count myself amongst that, is that they've got a chip on their shoulder when it comes to elk. You know, because elk are doing really well as a population, and there's a whole bunch of members that belong to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and a lot fewer members that belong to the Mule Deer Foundation. And so I just didn't bring it up because I didn't want to make people feel bad and make them think that I care about elk more than I care about mule deer, because I don't. It's just that there's more elk in this country, and I have opportunities to hunt them in December, and I don't have any place to hunt mule deer in December.
I think you have it wrong. I think you should say, I'm doing mule deer a favor.
Oh, that I'm. Yeah, but I'm probably. Well, I've got a bull tag, so I'm only going to take a bull out. If I'm doing mule deer a favor, I got to wipe out a bunch of cows. Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. Dinger, what are you doing?
Well, I'm listening to you gentlemen. One of the things I'll point out is that you said good day to the gravelers, and spelled the same way, but meaning a completely different thing is the grovelers. Maybe we should
I think I said the graveliers.
Graveliers. Yeah, but better a gravelier than a groveler, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Well, that's the end of my profound contribution to this.
Don't make it something it's not.
Well, did you guys have a good Thanksgiving? You know, this is going to air a little bit after Thanksgiving, but I haven't had a chance to talk to you guys since Thanksgiving. Did you guys have a good Thanksgiving?
Absolutely wonderful. Shot rifles off the new deck. Can't beat that. Ate ourselves into food comas. Yeah, it's good.
Did you guys have cranberries?
Yes.
Do you know why cranberries are red?
No.
Because they saw turkey dressing.
Hey, by the way, cranberries from the fruit or from the can?
From the fruit.
From the fruit.
No, from the can.
And actually kind of an elaborate heirloom recipe. So it's cranberries, carrots, orange peel, and orange juice, a little bit of brown sugars, vinegar, and it just basically stews all down into this, and a little garlic of all things, into this delicious relish that you will relish.
A lot of work to make a cranberry not taste like a cranberry.
Have you ever picked a cranberry? A wild cranberry?
Never have.
Is this also going to lead to a Michael Kinn joke?
No, this is not. This is not going to lead to a Michael Kinn joke. Although Eric probably has a whole bunch of them after our trip to Kansas. But no, I have been out in bogs in northern Minnesota in the fall and found wild cranberries, and they're delicious. That's all. That's cool. All I got.
You know, I've seen them in Maine, but I don't think I picked them.
Well, it's probably not allowed in Maine because they have a lot of rules. Maybe you can pick them on Sundays when you can't hunt.
like not being able to shoot sandhill cranes in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Ooh, gosh, don't even say that. Like our tourism department's favorite form of wildlife. is the 87 people a year that watch sandhill cranes.
Oh,
Never mind the 87,000 people that come to the state to hunt. But we don't. Not that I sound resentful about that, but it's crazy that in these smaller states that tourism and fish and wildlife people don't work together. It's a huge driver of tourism. Something to work on. What are we talking about today, Mr. McKean?
Well, we've got a few things on our mind. We've all been out in the rooster patch. Some bigger than others. So we're going to talk a little bit about our dog's experience there. I want to talk about a little experience I had. Oh, as if on cue,
almost on key?
Did you just jab that dog in the ribs?
No, she's looking at me. She's like, "What are you? It's time to go home."
I'd like to talk a little bit about my experience in South Dakota hunting private land that's managed for soil health, but a big byproduct of that is the best wild rooster hunting I've ever seen. And then kind of ask aloud why South Dakota has such a problem with pen-raised roosters. Man, we might talk a little bit about your experience with other canines in the pheasant patch. I don't know. We're just going to have a time. But let's talk about pheasant hunting. So where have you guys been hunting?
Well, I've been gallivanting about the Midwest, honestly. I've now hunted in Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, and Minnesota. I got this new red dog, and she has gotten the full workout over the last couple of weeks. And it's, as I've told you guys, she's my first dog, and she's frankly just a joy to be around. She's a great little family dog. But it was so much fun this last weekend. We were up in South Dakota hunting near Corsica. And this was maybe her 7th or 8th hunt. And she had retrieved a few birds, and it was definitely starting to hunt the weekend before. But it was almost as if the light came on for her. She started putting up birds. She brought 8 birds back to my hand, and even had an epic run them down across a cut bean field, 200-yard, just all-out sprint retrieve that we caught on video, which was really fun. So I'm in a place with this little puppy right now where all I want to do is take her hunting. And I've never thought that way before. And I've never had the kind of dopamine hit you get from spending time with a dog and seeing your dog kind of have it click. So that's, I'm sure, something you guys have felt a lot of times, but it's a new way to make it fun.
It's honestly the only reason that I got into pheasant hunting in the first place, because I had convinced myself that I had no interest in pheasants. I'd grown up a duck hunter and rough grouse, and we'd hunted pheasants a little bit. And admittedly, being in Minnesota, we don't have as good a hunting as what you grew up with in South Dakota and things. But it was my last dog, Delta, that loved pheasants so much. And, and she was a pup in the early 2000s when pheasant populations really started to take off. And the extreme joy she had from pheasant hunting is what finally made pheasant hunting for me fun. And I'll admit it now. I love chasing ringnecks, but there was a time when I kind of looked down my nose at pheasant hunters as well. I mean, they're an introduced species. I'm going to hunt native birds, but I don't feel that way anymore. Love hunting pheasants, but it's all about the dog. Really, it is.
I hunted pheasants a lot without a dog. My early years in Montana, and it's a different experience. It's not really as effective for starters, but you learn kind of, I think, a little bit more about places that you can effectively hunt them and pinch them, and then how they behave when you're just on foot. So when I got a dog, I kind of screwed everything up because I was approaching it the way I did as a dogless pheasant hunter. But now really, when big game season is over, I become a pheasant hunter, and really I just turn to waterfowl when pheasant season is over. And that's kind of been my hierarchy with a dog. And I took you talked about the dopamine hit. I'm going to put the dope back in dopamine when it comes to Nellie. I took her on the South Dakota pheasant hunt, and I was pretty nervous because this is with Pheasants Forever, and I knew there was going to be some pretty hotshot dogs there. Well, it turns out Nellie was the only lab, and I was immediately just terrified of how she was going to do. Was she just going to break the minute she got on the scent of a running bird and just ruin the whole field? So I was really trying to check her and keep her close. Well, I hunt by myself a lot, just me and Nellie. and part of the dopamine hit I get is watching a flusher go after a bird. And I'm a distance runner. I don't mind going after my dog because there's just such an electric moment when that bird rises. It's kind of a reward for both me and the dog. Well, I couldn't do that with a whole field full of setter and pointer hunters. Anyway, she was remarkable. She worked close. She did bust one field. I was hunting with Anthony Houck from Pheasants Forever, and we had a bunch of birds that were really close, and it was just too much for Nellie. She just broke and flushed them all out. But that was really her only infraction. She did great.
Well, Anthony hunts with those little itty bitty cockers. Those are flushers, so you weren't the only flusher there.
They're also a little bit like black and brown caterpillars, woolly worms, whatever you call those caterpillars. They're about the size of those woolly worms, and they also work about as close to him as a worm would. It was actually really cool seeing those little spaniels work, but it's a whole different crew talking about a rangy 80-pound lab that just wants to run. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I did want to talk a little bit about one just fascinating experience I had while I was out in South Dakota with Pheasants Forever. We traveled out to, the first day we hunted around Aberdeen. When I was with Outdoor Life, we recognized Aberdeen's Pheasant Coalition with an open country, Outdoor Life Open Country Award for really imaginative work they're doing to try to tie tourism. We were just talking about sandhill cranes in Nebraska and tourism, but Aberdeen's done just a yeoman's work to really be on the map for the traveling pheasant hunter. And one way they've done it is to ensure there's huntable birds and accessible land around Aberdeen. They've sort of leveraged CRP, and landowners who have CRP that maybe is expiring with, I guess you call it an enhanced CRP or CRP plus. And some of it is just that it's really high quality pheasant habitat that's enrolled in CRP, but they get a boost for allowing a little bit more public access to it. And then the Aberdeen Pheasant Coalition ground is additional ground that people enroll in this program. It's all publicly huntable. Communities inside and businesses in the Aberdeen area put up $100,000 to pay these landowners to enroll their land in this additional program. So if you go to Aberdeen without a shotgun, you're missing the best part of Aberdeen.
I agree. Aberdeen is wonderful. I mean, it's magical with the public land and some of the great private land they got around there. It's awesome.
Well, they take the Welcome Hunters banner that you might see in a lot of rural towns during hunting season to an entirely different level. I mean, all of the hotel associations clad their clerks and house cleaning staff in the Hunt Aberdeen sweatshirts. I mean, it's a really unified effort that's paying off. And one piece of evidence that it's paying off is the Aberdeen Pheasant Coalition is no longer called the Aberdeen Pheasant Coalition. They're enlarging it to lots and lots of different communities outside Aberdeen. So it's really taking off as a model that can really tie tourism and destination hunting back to the resource. But anyway, the first day we hunted just public walking areas around Aberdeen. The second day we went out to possibly the loneliest town in South Dakota, a little place called Tolstoy. Dinger, I think you said you were familiar with it, but it's way, way out there, southwest of Aberdeen. We hunted with this fella, fascinating person named Eric Johansson. I think some of the people in the pheasant orbit will be familiar with him, but his family owns a pretty good-sized farm. They're fourth-generation natives of South Dakota. They have really turned their entire place into a sustainable operation that really tries to maximize the wildlife values out of everything they do, whether it's row cropping or whether it's cattle grazing. They do have a pheasant outfit, a hunting operation that brings in some money too, but you get the feeling when you hear Eric talk that he'd be hunting pheasants whether or not it was a paying destination hunting operation or not. One of the interesting things that we talked about, big picture, is the conservation community has spent a lot of horsepower trying to lobby every farm bill for increased or at least maintained CRP caps. We've done a lot of work on commodity pricing and floors within the farm bill to make sure that corn prices or cereal grain prices stay above a certain level. The whole objective of this is to keep farmers on the farm to ensure that we don't turn rural America into an industrial site. Somebody with Pheasants Forever said the best thing for pheasants is working farms and small farm ownerships and a sustainable rural economy. And one of the things that really woke me up to this is forever the kind of magic benchmark in the Corn Belt has been $7 corn. If we can just get $7 corn and keep it there, we can make a go of this. But that's $7 corn is the product of a lot of things that have to go right, and they often don't go right. So one of the takeaways from the Johanssons is they want to make sure that they've got a sustainable operation when corn is $4 or $3.75 or all these things that they really can't control. And the way they're doing that is really minimizing their input costs. So they're planting cover crops instead of fallowing or instead of chem fallowing and putting a lot of inputs in there. They've got a really intensive rest rotation grazing system for their cattle operation. It's a ton of work, but what they've realized is all of these sort of returns to small-scale agriculture have been really good for their bottom line, and it's been really good for pheasants. So we had a magical day hunting wild birds on a place that it's a working place. Their first priority is not raising pheasants, but it's a hell of a byproduct. That's my soliloquy on Johansson Farms.
So talk about, just for a minute, if you would, Andrew, when you say the rest rotation, give us an example of what you mean by that. Because I'm sure some of our listeners are managing for wildlife and maybe also operating farms. Talk for a minute about how they're saving money on inputs. And maybe that's obvious to everybody else, but when I listened to Eric talk, I was completely blown away by the science of soil that he had sort of concocted on his own largely.
Yeah, there's actually, so the big picture idea of rest rotation grazing is to try to mimic essentially bison grazing patterns where there's intensive grazing of forbs and grasses, forbs being the little brushes, prairie flowers or wildflowers and brush of an area. You know, what buffalo typically did is they would hit it hard, but they'd move on, and they just didn't hammer stuff. What's happened, especially with stocking rates to try to maximize production potential of ground, is you put a lot of cows on a place, and then they basically stay there, if not year-round, but for an awful lot of the season. So they tend to graze the forage base down to the nubs, but they kind of impair the soil by their hooves. They tend to concentrate in wetter areas, especially during the hot summer months or drought periods, so they can really hammer some of these fragile soils. And what happens is there's not a recovery period. So when you have year-round, or at least most of the year-round grazing, you tend to start to get a monoculture of grasses. It's just not a very productive place, certainly for wildlife, but increasingly it's not a productive place for grazing bovines. There's been a lot of work, especially in the West, with rest rotation grazing programs on public land. It's actually the BLM has that as one of their requirements for public land leasers. And we're one of them. I live on a working ranch. We've got a big BLM lease with a 3-pasture rest rotation system. But what I notice about that is, certainly compared to what Johanssons are doing, these are big 1,000-acre pastures where cows might be for 4 months, well, not 4 months, but probably for 6 weeks in each of those pastures, maybe 2 months. They still hammer, especially the riparian areas. So I'm disappointed with how rest rotation is working on our place, but I think because the units are so big. And what Eric has been doing on their place is their grazing units are as small as 40 acres. They've got basically a hot wire pen that they will put around these small sort of areas of a pasture and then move the cows sometimes every couple of days or every week to a different place in that pasture. And as he described it, he's like, it's an art and a science. You can kind of figure out how to relieve the pressure on grass based on how the grass is growing, but you really don't know what's going to happen in terms of precipitation that's going to come ahead. So they're figuring it out as time goes along, but I was just amazed at the intensity of that. I mean, if you're talking 40-acre little sub parts of a pasture, you're talking a lot of work. I mean, you're out there moving those cows all the time. And sometimes you're hauling water to them because that portion of the pasture might not have a stock pond or a water tank in it. So if you're going to commit to this, you're probably going to commit to an awful lot of just physical labor and time and attention to it too. But the payoff is a real mosaic of vegetation on these places. We were there in late November, so it was really hard to see this in the field. But the pictures he had just showed this lush mosaic of warm season grasses, forbs, wildflowers, pollinator species on a grazed pasture. You just don't see that as much. You also leave a lot of residual cover that tends to hold snow more instead of having it blow off. So you get a lot more precipitation that runs into that melts into the ground. So you've got a better water table there too. And he tends to, when he takes his cows to market, they tend to be fatter than his neighbors who just keep their cows in a single pasture all season long. So it does pay off for the bottom line. But as he said, you don't always see that return on your investment right away. It can take years. And that delta between when you first start doing it and the payoff can be pretty frustrating, especially with $4 corn, and $1.20 calves.
Mm-hmm. But the byproduct of it is the mosaic of land that they've created is creating a wild pheasant population beyond what just about anybody else can create. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I said it kind of at the outset about South Dakota's little problem with pen-raised birds. We could probably devote an entire show to this, but South Dakota is being a destination pheasant hunting state. About the only way to sustain that kind of hunting pressure is to release pen-raised birds because the infrastructure, the soil, and the productivity of the land can't sustain that kind of hunting pressure. And Eric is pretty sensitive about it. He'll move hunters around. He doesn't want to hammer a place just to ensure that there's that carryover of breeding hens and having the cover to do it. So I think a lot of those the planted pheasant operations could learn a ton about this and start to invest the profit that they make on the destination hunters really on the habitat. I think the outcome would be pretty exciting to see South Dakota wean itself from the pen-raised pheasant operations.
I've hunted on a couple of those preserve hunts in South Dakota. So the crazy thing is it's a mix of, there's wild birds out there too, because they've got habitat and they're grown birds, and the hens you're flushing are wild hens. They're not releasing hens usually out there, but you'll see these high ratios of roosters to hens. And it's weird to me that these preserves operate that way, because you don't see that in Minnesota. You're either a game farm or you're shooting wild birds here. They're trying not to mix. And I do see opportunities there where they've got habitat, they've got cover, and sometimes I'm disappointed to know that a lot of these birds that we're getting up in front of our dogs were released. They might have been released 2-3 months before I got there, but they weren't naturally raised birds. That bothers me. That being said, South Dakota still produces millions of wild birds. It truly is the mecca for pheasants, and it's a pretty cool place. And I've known Eric Johansson a little bit for a couple of years, and I'm always fascinated to hear what the latest things he's working on. And it's funny the way he describes his rotational grazing. I've seen it tried on public lands in places where the Fish and Wildlife Service in North Dakota, and even some places in Minnesota, I've seen where they have got grazing experiments going on where they have cattle and they're doing that rotational grazing. And sometimes you show up in the fall and there's no grass because it's been mowed down, and you think, well, this sucks. But those are the places where I find more sharptails these days. They seem to be associated with that shorter grass grazed cattle operation than some of the more untouched tallgrass prairies. So I think there's some benefits there that the birds have developed over millions of years of being on a prairie. Well, not the pheasants, but the sharptails with bison, that I think mimicking nature as much as we can is a good management strategy.
And also managing for the small things. This was one of the just little asides that Eric tossed out, and I can just see immediate implications on our own operation. So he said when they hay a place, so they have pretty interesting cattle operation. They have the rest rotation pasture operation in the summertime. They do a lot of cover cropping of after they pull out, especially like a winter wheat crop, they'll overcrop it with a cover crop. Usually it's a mix of rye and some brassicas like a radish or a turnip. They'll turn their cows into that to graze. But, central South Dakota is pretty tough in the wintertime, so they have to have a little bit of hay. So they have some native grass that they hay. So in my country in eastern Montana, a typical haying operation or swathing operation, you start at one edge and you go in a circle to the middle. We are typically doing that in, June into July, and it's nothing if you're running a swather in good pheasant country to bust a bunch of pheasant nests, and it's not uncommon to see a decapitated hen sitting on a nest of busted up eggs. One of the things that the Johansons are doing is they'll start their swathing on an edge of the field that's opposite cover. They won't go in a circle. They'll just go in a line that basically works the standing grass toward that cover. So if there are any pheasants in that in the hay, they're going to flush out and go into the cover. That's a tiny little thing. It doesn't cost any more than haying in a circle, but it's pretty wildlife friendly.
I remember my grandfather had flushing bars on his haying machines, but
Toilet?
But they move so slow. No, he didn't have a toilet. I mean, they had an outhouse, but they would hang down in front of the cutters. I don't know how far, and the whole point was supposed to be that it flushed the birds before the cutter wheel got to them. I don't know if it ever worked. Of course, he was farming a lot slower than modern machinery works, but I don't see that anymore, and I'm exposing my lack of connection to modern agriculture when I bring that up, because I'm sure modern hay operations don't even think about that kind of stuff. Sorry I brought it up.
Yeah, wow, that was a kind of a reset. At least you didn't say anything about the sickle.
Well, my grandfather had a sickle. That was how we used to cut hay.
Well, he's also known as the Grim Reaper.
Well, German immigrant.
Well, you know what they say about the graveyard?
What do they say about the graveyard, Dad?
People are just dying to get in there.
Yes, they are.
Indeed.
Speaking of the graveyard, I think I saw pictures of you guys with a couple of maybe non-target trophies from your pheasant hunts.
Indeed.
I watched Eric Dinger take a coyote. It must have been 10 yards in front of my dog. It was spectacular. Tell us the story, Eric.
Well, I am the great coyote hunter of Nebraska. No, I'm not. I think all but maybe 3 or 4 coyotes I've shot in my life, I've shot wild pheasant hunting. That's an area I need to improve. I love to coyote hunt. I just haven't done it as much as I want to. It seems there are other things to hunt always. Sad story. So where we were hunting in Kansas, man, they had coyotes everywhere. Ryan, what did we see? 8?
Yeah.
In the day and a half we hunted?
Yep.
Which 8 you see means there's probably 8 you don't or more.
Well, we killed 3 of them.
We were in this pasture that had a little, what do they call it down in Kansas? Cane, they kept calling it. To me, it was like grain sorghum, like tall.
Yeah.
8-foot tall stuff bent over, just great habitat. But at the one end of the cane sorghum field, a cow had just had a calf, just either that day or maybe the evening before. And we had been seeing coyotes, and we walked this field to the end. We had a great hunt. We flushed one covey of, I don't know, around 30, 40 quail. Just one of the biggest coveys of quail I've ever seen out of this field. But we got all the way to the end, and not 5 feet in front of the guy hunting next to me, which happened to be our host, a coyote busted out and ran backwards. And if that doesn't tell you anything about how wily that animal is, I mean, he to think you could get 5 feet from a coyote before you bust it is a little crazy. And of course, the dogs took off after it, but it had a nice little head start. And so I got a chance to shoot the coyote, and the landowner got a chance to take out some vengeance on the coyote because apparently the coyotes. That's a kind of an inside joke that we probably don't need to share on the
No.
internet. Needless to say, our host was not keen with coyote. And when the folks on that trip listen to this, they're going to giggle because I've not been around a guy who hated an animal more than that landowner hated the coyote. That's for sure. But they had he'd seen him eating his calves. They're always in and around his operation in ways that he hated, so he had some animosity for him. So what was really fun about that, and my lasting memory of shooting the coyote, because it's not that big of a deal, is because the landowner hated him so bad. I got to the end of the field, drug the coyote out, and I looked at him kind of coyly, and I was like, "Guess I'm invited back, aren't I?" And he goes, "You damn sure right, you're invited back anytime you want to come."
Eric left several cuss words out of that because well, Julian is expressive, but yeah, he was happy. He was so happy about that. So Julian got 2 while we were hunting, so we got a total of 3 while I was in Kansas. When I was in South Dakota in early October, we killed 2 on that hunt as well. I have never seen so many coyotes killed, in pheasant hunts as I have this year. And I think it's because my perception is that there are just a lot of coyotes this year. What are you guys seeing? Are you seeing more dogs running around?
I definitely am, but it also may be a function of where we're living. So we just moved into this house that we built up on a ridge. I've got my spotting scopes trained on the ridges, and so it was great for deer scouting. But I saw coyotes every single day, and almost every drainage I would look up. And so whether they were there all the time, and I've just never had a spotting scope at my disposal, who knows? But I sure saw a lot. And in fact, one day, my boy was out hunting. He said he busted a coyote out of a draw early in the day, like right at shooting light. And that coyote, he said, he ended up walking something like 6 miles that day looking for mule deer. He said that coyote followed him all day, would just stay just out of kind of range or visibility, just kind of maybe up on a ridge and then down and then just always moving, but almost like it was shadowing him in case he got something. That's the way he looked. He considered it. So that was kind of cool. I mean, I'm not above or below opportunistically taking a coyote when that is presented, but I actually really like to see the little boogers. And to me, the highest and best use of a coyote is intentionally hunting them, calling them in and getting them that way. But I certainly will get them opportunistically when I can. I just don't always feel awesome about it.
I get what you're saying. To trick a coyote and call it in and kill it is absolutely the challenge, and the excitement is better. It's just my experience is when I'm hunting with a landowner, if they give me the orders in the morning to kill coyotes, I kind of feel an obligation, now if they gave me an order to kill eagles, I'm not going to do that, but an unprotected species. And it like Eric said, it's one of the quickest ways to get invited back is when you've got a rancher that hates coyotes that bad and you kill one. They love it. But I had an experience this week. So I live in the suburbs in the Twin Cities, and new house, and I've got a nice big yard, and I was so happy that I have it because I can start working my dog some better distances. But this earlier this week, I was throwing the dummy for her out in the dark in the morning at 6 a.m. and I had a coyote come trotting up and sit down about 20 yards from the farthest that I was working my dog to, and I held on to her, and the coyote, or the coyote, and we need to talk about that, was just sitting there on the edge of this lake, and it just looked like it was trying to get our attention. It didn't seem to care anything about me, and it just sat there for a little while, and then I threw the dummy short so that my dog didn't get anywhere near it, and she made the retrieve, and when I did that, it trotted a little bit closer, and then it just sat there, and it was almost like he was trying to get my dog to go down to it. It almost looked like he was being playful. And after a few minutes of it realizing I wasn't going to let my dog go anywhere near it, a couple more coyotes came trotting up out of the woods, and then this is in the suburbs. This is a city of 50,000 people in the South Metro of St. Paul, and I had they start trotting off across the lake, and three more come out. So I saw six
Really?
coyotes all together at one time. Now, this intervening week while I've been moving in and I've been home a lot, and I've also got my spotting scope trained out the back window. I'm spotting coyotes in ones and twos, uh, but at least for that moment that morning, there were six coyotes all gathered together. Now I think they might have been hunting. There's some open water on this lake, and there's some ducks there. They might have been trying to catch ducks, and they were congregated. But you don't think of coyotes as being a pack animal, but for a moment, it sure looked like I had a pack of six coyotes out there. Um,
Hmm.
so
I've been in the middle of one of those. Quick story. I saw on the hoof one of the two or three biggest deers. I saw on the hoof one of the two or three biggest deer I've ever seen when rifle hunting a couple of years ago. It was walking between cedars, and I timed it up between one cedar and the next and shot, and ended up killing a deer and walked up on the deer, and somehow this massive deer that I found or had seen from 150 yards or so had somehow put the slip on me, and another deer had walked between the trees I was expecting that deer to walk between. So I ended up killing a 2.5-year-old deer, and the deer I was looking at was at least 5. And I went down to retrieve the deer, and there was a 20-acre pond right there, and this deer. I knew he had to have been in there somewhere close, and my dad was at the other end of this pond in these cedar trees, and so I knew that if I walked to retrieve my deer, and that deer was still heading in the same direction, I was going to bump him towards my dad. So I walked down to the deer I had killed, and I hear that, 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 and I walk all the way down to the pond where the noise is coming from, and this monstrosity of a mule deer is swimming directly across the pond. Somehow it scented my dad, knew I was on the other end, and had swam across the pond. He got out, had him in my scope at 100 yards across the pond, just looking at him. And he was, I think of him as the Miami Hurricanes buck in my head because he looks like the Miami Hurricanes buck, just big and wide and tall and old, gray. So I quickly double back all the way around the pond, all the way around to the far end of the other side of the pond, thinking there's no way that deer busted out, and I was going to try and push him back towards my dad. Well, I'm creeping through cedar trees, kind of crawling under them, and all of a sudden I smell something. It just stinks. And suddenly I realize that I am crouching, like not quite over, but maybe 5 feet from an active coyote den. And I look up, and there's a coyote in front of me at about 5 yards, and I quickly stood up and kind of busted through the branches, and two more flushed right behind me at about 5 yards. So I had three coyotes. Like, I'm not sure they were hunting me as much as they were, trying to protect their den. But you talk about an unnerving feeling in the woods, because that was a spook for sure. So I've never looked at them the same. I do not share Andrew's sympathy for that animal. That animal can and should be hunted, in my opinion, when you can. Scary. So your dog, I don't know what they were thinking about your dog. They were probably duck hunting, you're right. And it is creepy when you get that close to them.
And they are pack animals. I mean, you sure. I know everybody's heard, big pack singing at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of cool because these dogs here, the coyotes here, that live around my house now, they are very vocal. They talk every night. So I feel like I'm in the glass cow of central Montana. When I'm sitting on my deck and I can hear the coyotes singing.
What do you call a cow with no legs?
What do you call a cow with no legs, Eric?
Ground beef.
Uh-huh.
So what do you call a coyote? Who calls them coyotes? Coyotes, as we say in my tongue.
In Glasgow?
In Glasgow, they're called coyotes.
I think that's kind of the Western thing. When I talk to people around town, when my neighbor came and told me that there were these devil dogs running around our neighborhood, he called them coyotes, and he's a native Minnesotan from the Twin Cities area. I've kind of been mixed my whole life, coyotes and coyote, yotes,
Song dogs.
song dogs. I think
That was a really short brainstorm.
well, we have very
you
small
didn't really
brains.
contribute to it.
Snowmobile bait?
Canis latrans.
Oh boy! Tell me, you guys, at some point in your childhood, you don't have to incriminate yourself as adults, but tell me at some point in your childhood, somebody took off across a cut bean field or something in their truck chasing a coyote. Did that ever happen to you guys?
In my childhood, I did it in adulthood in Kansas.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to incriminate anybody because I don't know that that's a passable way to hunt coyotes.
I am told by natives in Kansas that it is legal to run coyotes down and shoot them from a moving vehicle. I can neither confirm nor deny that. The funny thing is, I know people at Kansas Parks and Wildlife I could ask, but I don't really want to know the answer because I've got a friend who does it all the time, and I would hate to have to judge him. But yeah, I was.
Sounds a little bit like a black squirrel trapping story, doesn't it? All allegations.
The thing is, I don't think you did anything wrong, Eric. I think you're just ashamed that you didn't shoot it. That you live trapped it.
You must be talking about a different.
Pissed it and taxidermied it. Gassed it in the garage.
Yeah.
I do have a line on 2 white squirrels that live in the suburb just south of me. So bring that live trap on up.
About every 5th year, there's enough snow in Glasgow to justify owning a snowmobile. But that doesn't stop people from buying a new snowmobile every year. And then it just sits there. But one of the great appeals for the people who own snowmobiles in my town is that they can go coyote hunt places that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to get to in heavy snow. And I do know some of them have run down coyotes and dispatched them without ever firing a shot. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Yeah.
It's a very South Dakotan way to approach coyote hunting. Allegedly, again.
I would like to officially say that I don't approve. So
I don't either. Well.
Oh, wait a minute. I don't either.
No, it's a dichotomous question. You have to say that you support it because you have to be different. No,
I support it in the way I support black squirrel trapping.
How do you say? So how did I miss it? You know, I wasn't really listening. I was just waiting for my turn to talk again. How do you pronounce coyote, Eric?
Same as you. I grew up mixed. I think in South Dakota where I lived, there was a lot of coyote talk
on it.
But I say coyote. I think I was corrected. You know, one of the things that happens when you move from the great north with that sweet accent that you have, Bronson, is you spend a lot of time training it out of your voice because you get made fun of for it constantly.
Yeah.
It's not like a cool Southern or English accent where it's charming or begs a story. It's everybody knows exactly where you're from and they don't like it. And so I lost it. And maybe along with losing that, they trained coyote out of my blood. But I'm a coyote as well.
I've been told that I don't have as thick of an accent as I used to. I don't know if that's true or not. Oh, well,
you're not as bad as some of your fellow man up that way. That's for sure.
I appreciate.
You get up there by Brainerd. The movie Fargo isn't a comedy, you know.
No, that's a drama. But the thing that I don't understand is that in the hometown that Andrew is from, Glasgow, there's a G in the middle of the word, but when he pronounces it, I don't hear a G sound at all.
Glasgow.
It's like
all you hear is just charm.
Isolation.
Isolation.
Wind in the weeds.
You live in the place we take vacations. Want to get away? Have you considered Glasgow?
Well, I've been away. I actually can't wait. I can't wait to get home. But do you know why the cookie cried?
Why did the cookie cry?
Because his father was away for so long.
I honest to God don't get it.
Wafer.
Oh, Jesus. Apparently I'm the blonde one of the group.
Uh-huh. So it's segments like this that I think we should put on our highlight reels as we try to shop around our services to potential media companies. So,
well, we had a chance to pitch our podcast to a respected media buyer in this industry, and he says that continually referring to our listener is not a good place to start a pitch to a media company. So maybe we'll improve on that, at least in how we talk about it. Maybe not the listener part of it.
Yeah, see, but I just don't think they get the bit. You got to get the bit.
You got to get it. You got to get in early, Mr. and Mrs. Sponsor.
I feel like we should wrap this one up because there are a couple other topics on our minds that are going to take longer, and I think we need to delve into them. But I think that's actually a pretty good one to end on. So, I hate to be that guy away for so long, but I'm going to...
What? Okay, before we end, you guys have to tell our listener, because I know it has to be true, that you guys have some sort of strange pact where you laugh hysterically at each other's jokes. And then all of mine just pan. And I'm okay with it. I can live with it. I'm a man.
No, I honestly wish that were true because that'd be funny because I like being on the inside of the joke instead of the outside. But in all honesty, I don't know why, but the wafer thing it tickled my fancy. There's no conspiracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's
just made it one.
But we have a new bit. We have a new bit for the podcast.
Tune in next time as Ryan and Andrew don't laugh at Eric's jokes.
Bronson, you are hilarious.
Well, thank you. So are you.
I know.
You know who's not? You know who's not carrying their weight on this podcast is Eric Dinger. So.
Oh, ground beef himself.
Oh, all right, time to go.
Okay, well, I hope you've had a good time with us because we've had a great time with you. Until next time, keep it on gravel.